So Overwatch has been a very influential game, and it's been out for 2 years, which, when you compare it to a lot of the other competitive games, isn't way too long. But I hear a lot of the times people saying that there's a lot of their old friends quitting the game, that there's a lot of the casuals in the game, maybe just not playing it nearly as much as they used to. And I hear this a lot of the times in my own comment sections and by my own friends. I know a lot of them that just simply put, don't play any Overwatch anymore. And me, personally, I've still been grinding the game. I've still been enjoying it. I've been changing roles almost every single season to keep it fresh, but I think it's a lot of fun. But today I want to talk about why a lot of the older players are kind of quitting Overwatch. And the thing I want to start with right here is that every single game as it gets older is going to lose a part of its player base, but it's also going to keep a huge amount of its player base. If you look at Overwatch, yes, it has been losing people steadily over the months, over the years. That's just kind of how games work, but it still has a huge player base. So please do keep that in mind. I'm not saying that the game is dying at all. I'm just saying that, there are some players quitting the game that maybe have been in the game for a while, and this might be why you don't see way too many Season 1 Overwatch veterans anymore in your game's competitive. So now I guess let me go on to my first main idea to why some of the older players are quitting this game. And first off, I think one huge reason is that the game is very different now. And I think the biggest difference, at least for me when I play the game, and one of the biggest differences that I hear from a lot of my friends that used to play the game and they used to have a lot of fun, is that the game is so fast-paced now. And honestly, quite unfriendly to less hardcore players in a lot of situations. Mainly because of dive comp, and metas like dive comp, and just the huge amount of mobility being added to the game. Overall, Overwatch now, compared to its release, has like twice as much mobility. They're just adding it to every single character, and overall the game has had a huge mobility creep, which in a lot of cases is, kind of good. There's more people moving around, more interactions in the game, more things you can do. That's all good, but it can be kind of hard to keep up with, and especially if you're a player that gets really annoyed by everyone jumping all over the place, everyone flying all over the walls, all these new characters with tiny hitboxes being added into the game. You could see how that maybe could be frustrating. And the thing you have to remember is that people don't have to completely hate a game to stop playing it as much. If you just get frustrated a lot from a game that you just play casually, you're going to start to play it less. And especially when there's new huge games like PUBG, Fortnite, a lot of these other games showing up, I mean, yeah, sure, you're going to keep playing Overwatch, but you're probably going to play the game that's frustrating you a little less more often. And I think that dive meta, the way that the game is just so fast right now, and the mobility creep really has been pushing away the older players, because I mean, if you look at what it used to be back in the day, there was a lot of Reinhardt, there's a lot of McCree, and there's a lot of Mercy, a lot of slow push, a lot of Ryan v Ryan battles, mainly with Roadhog or Zarya backing them up. And when you compare that to now, it's just very different. And I'm not going to say that different is bad. That's one thing I want to keep in mind for all you guys. Some people might love dive meta, some people might love tank meta. It's really different for everybody, but you have to realize that somebody might have loved the meta when the game first came out, and might have loved how the game played when it first came out, but now that it's changed so much, they might like it quite a bit less, and that might be why they're not playing it too much. And honestly, for a lot of my friends, I've heard that's one of the main reasons. And maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe they just have to wait until another meta comes up that they really like, but I think that is one of the big reasons why people have been quitting this game. Now, another thing I want to talk about here that kind of continues on that is that the game really does kind of feel like it favors DPS players more now than ever before, really. And really by now I mean just for like the past 3 or 4 seasons compared to the very beginning of the game. When the game first came out, of course there were quite a few DPS players. I mean, the DPS role, it's honestly always been one of the funnest roles. There's been a ton of people playing that, but we did also see a lot of supports actually back in the day, and even more tanks. As far as I could remember, there were more tank players than support players, which definitely doesn't happen anymore, and overall the tanks were pretty fun. You could play Zarya, who had a lot of interactions in the game. You could play Reinhardt versus Reinhardt again, huge amount of interactions, and the characters like D.Va that normally, were less interactive because all she could do was defense matrix, were still there and still could do some stuff. I think though as the game has kind of evolved, it has become a lot more DPS focused. I mean, you have sometimes your Winston and your D.Va jumping in, but they kind of do the same thing again and again and again, not way too impressive. Your supports, they have some cool new stuff being added to them, especially Brigitte and some other characters. Zen can do some awesome stuff, but when you look at the really interesting characters and the ones that really are affecting the meta the most and really making the biggest plays, it has always been DPS, but I think even more now, it's easy to spot the DPS players. And again, that's not a bad thing. But if you're a player that used to play Overwatch, that really like to play tank, like to show off all your moves with this role, and you just can't really anymore, you can kind of see how that segment of the player base kind of disappeared. And I think that's kind of how the game works, and that's kind of how every single game works. Over time, different segments of your game and different player segments of your game are going to, slowly siphon off. As you change metas, as you change what characters are good, bad, as you change how the game is played, it's just going to inevitably happen. And again, it's not really a good or bad thing, but that is a big reason to why a lot of people just kind of don't want to play anymore. And again, not a huge population of people. Maybe you're only siphoning off 1 or 2% of the population, but still 1 or 2% over and over and over again over many years, you see could eventually add up pretty high. Now, to another thing I want to talk about, I think that the game, comparing the beginning of the release to now, has really become a much more team-based game. And yes, it was marketed as an extremely team-based game, but honestly, again, coming to individual outplays and individual skill and showing off, when the game first came out, obviously, it was a lot easier to be better than everybody else. And this is something that the game developers can't fix. That's just kind of how the honeymoon period worked. You could get into the game, you could practice your character for like 10 hours, and you were amazing at them compared to everybody else. Right now, though, most people are pretty good, and mainly what the game comes to is more team play. Whoever can get the best dive in or the best push in, and it's all kind of a mesh now. And again, that's how the game just has kind of evolved, but for a lot of players, it's just less entertaining to play through. I know there's just a lot of players that like to show their individual skill in a game, and it's changed quite a bit. And, that might be a good thing. It might make the game play more like the developers wanted, but it is, a little bit different. And I think, most team-based games become more team-based as time goes on. But really just the lack of adding any new individual ways to show off how great you're doing, it can kind of hurt people from getting that real high of excitement after doing a big play. Now you only really get that high after winning a game, which I guess does also come with time, but I think that's another thing to add to the pot about this. Now, another important part to this discussion that I think hasn't really been talked about way too much, at least in my opinion, is the fact that Overwatch has very fun core gameplay. That's why so many people are playing it. But at the same time, it's a game that gets very frustrating over time. And I think in just simple terms, it's frustrating because you don't really have an equal chance to win or lose in every single game and really like every single matchup. And I think that that's the way the developers wanted the game to be made, where you had to hero swap, where you had to change up your strategy every single match, and change up how you're playing, and change up your team comp. And yes, I think that's a good idea, definitely on paper, and pretty fun on execution. I think where it becomes frustrating is that you don't really feel like you have the same chance to win every single match, and sometimes when you just keep getting game after game after game where it feels like you can't do anything, it's not that fun to play. And I think the easiest game to kind of compare this to is CSGO, where I don't think it really has that problem at all. Of course, both games still do have random matchmaking, and that can be kind of annoying, but in CSGO, every single game, essentially you're put in and you're playing the same character as everybody else. I guess, there's two different characters, there's the terrorist and the counter-terrorist, but they play very similarly every single game. And what the game mainly focuses on is who has the better mechanical aim, who has the better positioning, and who can do slightly better team play. That is very dumbing it down. But you have that, and then you have Overwatch, where, and let's say in CSGO, this example, there's about a 50% chance you'll win or lose versus every other player, because you're playing essentially the same character. In Overwatch, though, let's say you're a person that likes to play a ton of Genji. Well, in some matchups against some characters, you have like an 80-20 matchup. It's almost impossible to lose versus that character. Versus other ones, like let's say Winston or Moira, it can be really annoying to play versus them, and maybe your matchup goes, to like 30-70, and a very hard thing to deal with. And I think that the core, hero changing mechanic and how it works is, again, a very fun one, but at the same time, extremely frustrating, because in a lot of cases, it feels like you're losing to somebody who is not outplaying you mechanically at all, might be playing way worse than you, but simply because they picked a different character that's better, they're winning versus you. And again, yes, I agree that that is probably a good thing, because it does, again, push for you playing more different characters and push for a more diverse meta and push for all that. I think that it does create a lot of people that just get kind of done with the game. And I think the real thing, I guess, to finally push here is that for a lot of people, if all your best heroes have been trashed for a while, it's just not fun to play that, because you don't have a 50% chance to win with your bad hero. Let's say that you were playing Reinhardt and Anna in season, let's say 3 and 4, and you played Ryan in like 1 to 3. Both those heroes really aren't the best, and if you're playing them now, you're having a bad matchup versus most people. And yes, you could learn the new characters and you could learn the best characters, but if you're a person that used to play the game and you like those old characters and you like how they used to play, you probably won't switch. You're probably going to always have a bad time on all these matchups now versus all these dive comps and everything. And in the end, it's not going to be that fun for you. And I think that's really one of the main reasons why so many people that used to play the game don't really anymore, just because how it is inherently made with the characters, how they match up together, and how it's hard to keep playing even when your certain character isn't that great anymore. Because, in other games, you can kind of just keep playing similar things, but especially in Overwatch, I think you are kind of punished, which, again, I think is probably, in game design, a good idea. But in practice, for a lot of players, it can be kind of hard to deal with. But anyways, these have just been my own personal opinions about Overwatch and why a lot of the older players in the scene have been quitting the game. Now, of course, again, probably the number one reason why people quit the game is simply because they get bored of it, they played it way too much, they're tired out, they want to play something else. That's the pretty simple other way to explain this, but I think there are quite a bit of key factors about the game changing that do also, push off a decent amount of players. But as always, this has just been my own personal opinion. For myself, I don't know if I'd still be playing the game if I didn't have a channel. Right now, I'm really loving the game, but, for quite a few seasons, I had no interest, and I was just making videos and just playing the game because I felt like I had a responsibility to. So, I don't know. I think I do have a decent enough capability to kind of understand what these people are thinking, and I have been playing since season 1. So, there you go with that. I guess there's my somewhat morsel of credibility. Now, if you've been a player that's been playing for a long time, please tell me down in the comment section down below. Tell me if you really feel like any of these things apply to you, and if they do, I guess leave a like or hit that subscribe button because I'll try to talk about more stuff like this in the future. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.